On August 26, 2017, a burst of signals from 3 billion light years away was detected. And for the first time, it appeared to be written in some kind of language. Every other signal we've detected from space was either a single burst, one loud moment and then silence, or a perfectly repeating pulse like a clock. But a message in any language requires change, either different kinds of pulses or different spacing between them. And this signal had both. An unknown pattern that didn't repeat. For the first time, we were looking at something that could carry a message, which leads to a fascinating question. How do we tell if a signal like this is coming from an intelligent source versus something naturally occurring? What's our intelligence filter? And if a signal did pass that test, what's our best plan on how to read it? The very first time we detected a radio signal from space was by accident during World War II. In February 1942, British military radar along the south coast suddenly filled with noise. They assumed the enemy was jamming them by flooding their radio frequencies with noise. It was a common attack. But soon after, physicist James Hay noticed the noise followed the sun across the sky. It wasn't coming from Earth. So he called the Royal Observatory, and they noted a massive sunspot was active, an explosion on the surface of the sun. And it confirmed that the sun was the source of this burst of noise. This realization opened up a new way of seeing the universe, not with visible light, but with invisible light, radio waves. A radio wave is just light at a frequency too low for your eyes to see. On Earth, we create radio waves with an antenna, which is a loop of wire we pass electric current back and forth through. And to detect it, you just need the same kind of wire somewhere else. When a radio wave hits it, it pushes a tiny oscillating current through the wire that we can detect. That's how radio works. But the sun is immensely powerful, billions of times louder in radio than anything a civilization could produce. So to detect anything quieter from far away, you'd need a much more sensitive antenna, which requires a much larger loop of wire. And that's exactly what Jocelyn Bell did in 1967 when she was 24, working on a homemade radio receiver to listen in space. She strung wires across 4.5 acres of posts at Cambridge University. She amplified the electric signal detected in this wire, like turning up a guitar amp, and visually plotted the total energy over time. What you'd see on an oscilloscope. If you build your own and do this, the first thing you'll notice is you always pick up some noise. Even pointing at the empty sky, there is a faint hiss. In 1933, Carl Jansky discovered that this hiss gets louder when you point at the bright strip of stars we see across the night sky, named the Milky Way, which we later realized was our own galaxy seen from the inside. Our entire galaxy is quietly humming in radio, and that background hiss is now measured in a unit named after him, the Jansky. It's our baseline. Anything we're looking for has to stand above it. But if we just plot the radio energy over time, it mixes all frequencies together into one measure. And just like a prism breaks white light into its component colors, we can break a radio signal into its component frequencies. When we do this, we get a spectrogram, frequency on one side, time on the other, the brightness showing how much energy. This gives us a fingerprint of what arrived. If I do this with my voice, it looks like this, many frequencies all at once, what we call broadband. A solar flare looks similar, energy everywhere all at once in a wave. But compare that to the simplest thing an antenna can send, energy at just one frequency, a single bright line, what we call narrowband. A radio telegraph works this way, one frequency switched on and off in short and long pulses. So when we first looked at space, we only saw noise, but as we started scanning closely at our galaxy, the first narrowband signal we detected was in 1951. This smooth bump on the spectrogram at 1420 megahertz. This made sense because we knew hydrogen, the most common element in the universe, emits at this specific frequency, like a tiny tuning fork running at 420 megahertz. And so in 1959, Morrison and Cocchione published a paper that kicked off the search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
What I would like to know is an answer to a very simple question. Are we alone as conscious beings in this entire buzzing 400 billion star galaxy, one of 10 to the 10th other galaxies?
And their argument was simple. Any civilization with radio astronomy would discover hydrogen's frequency early. And the region around it is the quietest part of the spectrum. So if you wanted to send a message someone might notice, this is where you'd put it. And that's why there was so much excitement on August 15th, 1977, when a narrowband signal hit at exactly 1420 megahertz and lasted for 72 seconds. It was 30 times the strength of the background noise. The astronomer who saw the signal on the printout circled it and wrote "wow," known ever since as the wow signal. We hope that there might be something hidden inside, such as a pattern buried in the tiny variations within that note, but when you zoom in, we only ever found random fluctuation. It lasted 72 seconds, and then silence. To this day, no one knows for certain what it was, and it never came back. Today's video is sponsored by Incogni. We've been talking about how to read signals, what patterns reveal about their source. And here's an uncomfortable one. Right now, hundreds of data brokers are profiling you. Your name, address, phone number, relatives, shopping habits, all bought and sold without your knowledge. I get calls constantly from people who already know my address, my name, details about me. That's the signature of a data broker. Recently, security researchers discovered an unsecured online database containing 149 million usernames and passwords from services like Gmail, Facebook, Netflix, and crypto platforms. And scammers use that information for targeted phishing. Criminals use exposed addresses to find people, and someone can open credit in your name before you even know your data was out there. Incogni contacts data brokers on your behalf, files removal requests, and fights back automatically. Their new custom removals feature, available on the Unlimited and Family Unlimited plans, lets you point to any site where your info appears, and a real privacy agent handles the takedown. Go to incogni.com/AOTP, use code AOTP for 60% off, link below. This brings us back to the student Jocelyn Bell, who in November 1967 noticed a short spike of energy repeating every 1.3 seconds. This clock tick in space, so precise they half-jokingly called it LGM1 for Little Green Men. It was like the wow signal where each pulse stood way above the noise, but inside each pulse, only random variation. Each pulse looks slightly different, but that's just from the noise of the journey, like a lighthouse beam flickering through fog. The flicker or variation is the fog, not the lighthouse. It turned out that this signal was a collapsed star more massive than our sun, but condensed into just the size of a city, spinning once every 1.3 seconds, sweeping a beam of radio energy like a lighthouse, known as a pulsar. After this, we found many more. And remember, to send a message that carries information, you need change. Different pulses, or different spacing, or different durations. All human and animal signals work this way, patterns of change. A chirp for danger, a different chirp for food. And this is why on August 26, 2017, it was so exciting. That signal also rose way above the noise, but had different intensities, durations, and spacings. Some of them repeated. On the spectrogram, they looked like distinct brushstrokes, distinguishable and reoccurring. The kind of thing that could be a symbol in an unknown alphabet. Which brings us back to the first part of our key question. How would we know if this is something potentially intelligent or naturally occurring? To create that intelligence filter, we need to start with understanding more deeply what nature normally produces. Consider the simplest case, pure randomness. Everywhere we look in nature, from galaxies to Earth to the atomic level, we find energy bouncing around. Take water. If we zoom in on the surface and check whether a tiny disturbance is pushing up or down at any moment and measure that thousands of times, it's going to look 50-50. Pure randomness at its simplest is equally likely outcomes. But now consider what happens when we add a few random events together. A shape starts to emerge. The best way to see this is a pegboard. Each peg is one random event, left or right. A ball dropped travels a random path and accumulates at the bottom. The rarest outcome is when the ball goes the same direction every time. There's only one path that does that. Most paths lead to the middle. That's why you get this shape. And this is why the ocean's surface follows this shape if we measure water height over time. At any point, thousands of little waves are passing through from different directions. Most of the time, they partially cancel, some pushing up, some pulling down, leaving the surface near average sea level. That's the middle of the curve. But once in a while, by pure chance, many waves line up in the same direction, all pushing up at once, leading to a rogue wave. Or all pulling down, leading to a rogue trough. Those are the tails of this shape. Gauss was the first to describe this shape. It happens anytime we add up random events. People's heights, temperature, the hiss between radio stations. We now call it a Gaussian distribution. This kind of noise, where every moment is independent of the last, is called white noise. What if instead each of these random events has an impact on the next outcome? In 1951, British hydrologist Harold Hirst published a study on the Nile River. He spent decades poring over centuries of flood records and found something strange. The Nile River wasn't memoryless like white noise. High flood years tended to cluster together. Low years clustered too. The signal had a drift to it, a kind of momentum, not a pattern, not a cycle, just a tendency for what just happened to keep happening for a while. On the pegboard, we can model this too. Imagine the weight of recent balls starts to pivot the entire board, which is on an axle. A run of balls landing in one direction will cause it to tilt that way, making the next ball more likely to go that way. And then a run the other way will tilt it back. The center wanders. This is called colored noise, randomness with momentum. The average wanders over time in a way that white noise never does. Now, if we take any of these signals, whether white noise or colored noise, and sort the measurements from most common to least common, we get the same basic shape, this rounded convex curve. It's a fingerprint we see across nature. But what about intelligence? The only way to detect a mind is through what it communicates. In the 1940s, a linguist named George Zipf did this same kind of analysis on human language. He counted every word in a book and ranked them from most common to least common, and the shape was flipped. Instead of a convex curve we saw with random signals, it was a sharp concave curve. And when he squished both axes to see the full range at once, the curve straightened into a clean line angled at 45 degrees, known as a power law. We find the same slope in every book and every language we analyze. It's a universal pattern, known as Zipf's law. Language acquisition has this mathematical fingerprint. So maybe we had our filter. If the pulses in a signal have this frequency distribution following Zipf's slope, maybe it's coming from a mind. Because when we put our noise signals on this same plot, they don't make a straight line. They bend and fall away, a different shape entirely. So let's return to our signal from 2017 with the various repeating symbols and order them by frequency of occurrence. We get this concave shape which looks eerily similar to the language pattern and nothing like noise. But nature has another trick up its sleeve we have to consider. In 1944, Gutenberg and Richter already noticed the same shape when they analyzed the size of earthquakes, many small quakes and a few very large ones, with the same gradual slope on the Zipf plot. And there's a physical reason for this you can demonstrate with a pile of rice. If you drop grains one at a time onto a pile, most grains cause nothing. Some trigger small avalanches, and rarely one grain will trigger a massive cascade. And if you measure these cascades and rank them, you'll get the same shape Zipf found in language. No brain required. Any system that accumulates stress and releases it, earthquakes, avalanches, lightning strikes, produce this shape if you measure them and rank them. And so this is the leading theory for what this signal was, a magnetar, which is like a pulsar but with a magnetic field a quadrillion times stronger than our sun, strong enough to tear apart atoms everywhere around it. And this field builds up stress in the crust until it cracks, releasing energy in starquakes. So Zipf's law is not enough to be our filter because nature can imitate it without a brain. We need a filter nature cannot fake. This brings us to Claude Shannon, who went much deeper than Zipf. Instead of just measuring how often each symbol appears, he measured sequences of symbols, pairs of symbols, triples, and beyond. And when you plot two symbol sequences on the same chart, the slope gets steeper. If you do it with three symbols, it gets steeper still, and that keeps going as you measure longer sequences. This is because the longer the sequence, the more predictable the next symbol becomes. Each symbol you know narrows what comes next. Shannon showed this predictability keeps growing the deeper you look, regardless of what language it is. And he created a measure of this called entropy, which is the number of yes-no questions you'd need to guess the next symbol. It's a measure of surprise. And the key insight is how entropy changes as you look deeper into a signal. This leads to the filter for intelligence we use today, proposed by Lawrence Doyle at the SETI Institute. On this chart, the y-axis is entropy. On the x-axis, it's sequence depth, how many symbols back you're looking. All naturally occurring signals we know of stay flat on this chart. Looking deeper doesn't help you predict what comes next, but with language it keeps dropping. The deeper you look, the more predictable it becomes. Only a mind produces this signature. And to show how universal this test is, they turned to dolphins. They analyzed dolphin whistles and found this same shape. So two species, no shared ancestor, have the identical mathematical shape behind their language. And so this is their final filter. Take any signal we receive and break it into chunks at its natural boundaries. Then rank them by frequency and check the Zipf slope. Then measure Shannon entropy over depth. If it plunges, a mind was potentially behind its creation. But detecting a mind is of course only the first step. How could we ever understand what it's saying? This leads to another one of Shannon's insights. You can think of this frequency of occurrence as probability. And so if you know the statistics of a language, you can run it forwards. Just select the next symbol according to the known probabilities. He tried this with some toy examples, making English-looking sentences with a simple machine that simply selected next letters according to their statistics. And at depth 1, it looked random. At depth 2, some shapes started to emerge. And at depth 3, it started to look more like convincing text, especially as he selected based on word probabilities. Shannon was surprised how convincing this text looked, and he noted that to go much deeper and capture the long-range structure of language, perhaps hundreds of words deep, his machine would need an impossible amount of memory. It's too big to build. Until it wasn't. Nearly 70 years later, we built his machine. Known as large language models, Large neural networks trained on one task, predict next word, turned out to be exactly that machine. When we looked inside, we found something unexpected. Concepts stored geometrically. Words that mean similar things end up in similar neighborhoods, surrounded by similar concepts. And those same neighborhoods appear in every language. The word for cold in Japanese sits in the same relative position to hot as it does in English. The shape is universal. Which is why these machines can translate, not by looking words up, but by rotating until the conceptual shapes align. Researchers are now using these networks by pointing them at signals we've never decoded. For example, MIT trained one on sperm whale clicks. It learned the structure well enough to predict whale behavior, diving, surfacing, or socializing, with nearly 90% accuracy. The pattern is there and the machine could sense it. And for the first time, we have a tool now that might help us understand what an intelligent signal is saying. Not by sharing a language, but by recognizing the shape of one. So now the alien hunters and the AI researchers are now sitting with the same unanswered question. What does it mean to find intelligence outside of the natural world?
I think even if there's a plausible argument for a few, we ought to keep looking. I'd even go further than that. If there's a plausible argument that there isn't anybody out there, bearing in mind that we can be wrong, we ought to keep looking, because the question is of the most supreme importance. It calibrates our place in the universe. It tells us who we are. And so it is worthwhile trying to find other civilizations, I would say, no matter what.
I've been making YouTube videos for 15 years, all of them trying to explain things I'm curious about in a way I enjoy. And one part of my process I've never shared is I use music to find the feeling of an idea before I explain it. And so now I have this very cool collection of music I listen to whenever I'm working on a new idea. It's great for focused work sessions, especially on a loop. And so I put together all my favorites from the past year into an album, my first ever music release. If you're interested, see the link below. Thanks for watching. Here's to another 15 years.